Hello everyone and welcome back to another reaction. Today we are taking a look at the Unbiased History of Rome again. Today this video is about the First Triumvirate. So let's go.
No friend ever served me, no enemy ever wronged me, whom I have now repaid in full. Such were the immortal words of the great Sulla, well, before he died of boy pussy overload. But his death does lead us into a new era of Roman history, that of the late Republic. These were the times of giants, my dearest pleb, well and truly overdone by better history channels. And due to the sheer amount of important events all happening simultaneously, we'll have to cover the main wars of the period, yes, but at the same time introduce the three great men who would define the age. So first, we begin with an ironic state of affairs. As you remember, due to Sulla's rightful purge of the Popularis faction, almost all of them died, but those who did survive were among the few great men in it, such as Sertorius, whose fame as a brilliant general attracted the attention of the rebelling Lusitanian tribes, whom Sertorius used to lead the Popularis revolt and take over all of Hispania.
Yes, Sertorius had been a prominent member of the Popularis faction of Cinna and Marius. During Sulla's civil war he had been sent as a praetor to govern the Iberian Peninsula. When his faction lost the war, he was driven out of Iberia by Sulla's forces to North Africa. Sertorius eventually came back, and with the help of the Iberian tribes, especially the Lusitanians, he was effectively able to kick out the Sulla appointed governor and establish his own little kingdom, you could say, in Spain, which he ruled for about 8 years. And during this time, he waged a successful guerrilla war against the various senatorial forces that were sent to quell this rebellion.
As always, the Senate's first reaction was to send a Metellus to fix things, dooming him to an unending guerrilla war, just in time for yet another Mithridatic war to trigger. So okay, what is guiding Mithridates' bloodlust this time, you ask? Well, the king of Bithynia, having no heirs, he willed his kingdom to Rome after his death, which Mithridates, absolutely seething, refused to accept, invading the province, restarting the conflict and laying siege.
Yes, Mithridates VI launched the so-called Third Mithridatic War at the same time as Sertorius waged his guerrilla war in Spain. So this actually meant that he was initially unopposed, and Appian and Plutarch claimed that Mithridates had assembled a force of about 300,000 men. Now that could be an over-exaggeration, but it's not an unreasonable number, given how urbanized Asia Minor was and how many people lived there.
To Cyzicus. Sent to stop him was the consul of the year, Lucullus, whom would stand by and watch as Jupiter destroyed Mithridates' siege weapons in a storm. And then he fucking threw a meteor at some point. Yeah, true story. Lucullus lived.
Yes, there are some stories about a meteor hitting the battlefield when Lucullus and the Mithridatic forces squared off, and as a result, no battle actually happened. But yes, Mithridates had by this point taken all the cities of Western Asia except Cyzicus, probably because many of their citizens had died fighting against Mithridates at the Battle of Chalcedon, where the Roman army had been defeated. Now, their resistance here will allow Lucullus to arrive and set up a counter siege, and this will cut off Mithridates' supply lines. And considering the vast amount of soldiers in his army, logistical problems was a real thing for him, and he didn't have enough food to hold out for long. So with the onset of winter and the looming threat of starvation and plague, Mithridates was just forced to break off the siege, and it was an unmitigated disaster, or would become one.
Later took this chance to cut off his supply lines, forcing him to flee east, and pursuing him all the way back to Pontus. Back in Hispania, Sertorius' guerrilla war continued to drag on. To help Metellus, the Senate sent Gnaeus Pompeius to Hispania, our first soon-to-be triumvir. Born to a rural patrician family and an optimate's father, Pompey started out his adult life after his father was mortally struck by lightning. If you're worried about the frequency of Romans dying to lightning strikes, just you wait until that happens to an emperor.
Yes, I believe it was Emperor Carus that was hit by lightning. Um, that's what I call bad luck.
Back to Pompey, he was able to dodge false accusations of theft while on trial. So elegantly, in fact, that the judge was like, "Whoa, you're awesome. Here, please fuck my daughter." Which
Yes, prior to his death, Strabo, which was Pompey's father, had been accused of embezzlement, but since he died, the charges were passed on to his son, Pompey. Now, according to the Roman legal system, it was he who was responsible since he was the son and legal heir of Strabo. And apparently, he was acquitted by marrying the judge's daughter, Antistia, which became Pompey's first of his 5 wives. Now, one thing you should know about the Roman legal system is that it was often senators who acted as the judges and prosecutors, and often at the same time. So it's not entirely surprising that some sort of political deal was cut here to acquit Pompey and his father of these charges.
he did. Later on, during Sulla's march to Rome, he raised his father's veteran legions to help him. Thankful, Sulla had him divorced and marry his pregnant stepdaughter, whom died in childbirth, so whatever. Later marrying Mucia, having 3 kids with her. I'm boring you with this because they will be relevant later on. Well, the 2 boys at least, so...
Yes, both of Pompey's sons would be very relevant later on, so we'll get back to those.
Feel free to forget her. As Sulla's supporter, Pompey gained fame by crushing several Popularis revolts in the Mediterranean, including one done by Brutus. No, his father.
Yes, after his Sicilian campaign, Pompey was nicknamed the Young Butcher for executing one of the Marian commanders without a trial. And in Africa, he subdued Numidia and executed its king, who was a Marian ally, and reinstated the previous ruler by the name of Hypsal, I believe. And therefore, he gained his Hypsal's and his son's favor. And this would be very important in the future, since Hypsal's son is none other than Juba of Numidia, a name we will hear in the next episode, I suspect.
A relevant detail for later. In his return, Pompey would be named Magnus by Sulla, somewhat ironically, then letting him have a triumph despite being far too young and using elephants instead of horses.
Yeah, Sulla was very reluctant to give Pompey this triumph, not only because he was too young, that's not really the main problem here, it's because Sulla is recognizing that Pompey is becoming very popular through all of these successful campaigns, and he wants to, keep him on the down. So he reluctantly grants this triumph, but he cleverly tries to offset this by granting simultaneous triumphs to 2 other Roman generals, and thereby, diminishing this success of his.
Also somewhat ironically, it was this Pompey that landed on Hispania. Admittedly, he was trashed on once he got there. He was facing Sertorius after all, but Metellus came to his rescue.
Yeah, Pompey actually had his allies in the Senate illegally appoint him proconsul, which would not really be possible considering he has not held the office of consul at this point. So he was granted this authority to lead an expedition to Spain, which illustrated his preference for military glory over any adherence to traditional political restraints within the Republic. And he was actually defeated by Sertorius, which was a great blow to his prestige, and he had to spend a year to reorganize his army. But eventually, with the help of Metellus and the fortunately timed murder of Sertorius, he was able to win the campaign.
And thanks to Sertorius' barbarian army idiotic decision to attack them head-on, they were defeated, forcing Sertorius to retreat, later on being betrayed by one of his fellow Popularis revolutionaries, whom seized his command position. What a shitty faction. Meanwhile, back in Capua, a lone Thracian slave toiled away in a gladiatorial school, being taught how to entertain his Roman masters and add some significance to his miserable existence. But this Thracian hated Rome, and oh how much he did. Such was his rage that he led a revolt with his fellow slaves, stealing kitchen knives, killing the guards, and breaking out, proceeding to steal gladiatorial weapons and rampage through southern Italy. Being stuck between two massive wars in opposite fronts, Rome could only afford sending 2 waves of plebs to face them, whom were all killed, predictably enough. By then, Spartacus had made Mount Vesuvius his base, and I swear, the moment the god Vulcanus finds out that a band of filthy slaves has occupied his home, he's gonna go mad. Mark my fucking words. Given the size of the slave revolt, a senator named Marcus Licinius Crassus offered to help.
Yes. Like they said, Spartacus seems to have been a Thracian who had apparently served in the Roman army but had deserted it at some point, and therefore he was captured and sold as a slave. And his slave army quickly grew in size. It started to operate in southern Italy, where the terrain was more suited to the type of guerrilla warfare they would wage against the Roman armies. And there had been traditionally much resistance to Roman hegemony in southern Italy, most recently in the Social Wars, but in many other conflicts in Roman history. And like I said, the size of Spartacus' army is said to have grown very quickly. According to Appian, it eventually reached a high of 70,000, which would have been an enormous force. And his army was able to successfully defeat multiple Roman armies under various commanders, until this guy enters the picture, our second triumvir, Marcus Licinius Crassus.
Another soon-to-be triumvir, and the bane of communists worldwide, being a man who actually earned his fortune. I know, imagine that. Born to your standard patrician family, Crassus had his family's wealth seized by Cinna's dictatorship, being forced to flee to Hispania to avoid the Red Terror. Later joining up forces with Sulla in his march to Rome, assisting him while fighting Carbo. And after Sulla made his proscriptions, Crassus would have his revenge, buying up a lot of the confiscated Popularis property for dirt cheap. With this,
Crassus became enormously wealthy through real estate speculation, which seems like a very modern concept, but it's not. It's been going on since the Roman times.
Newfound wealth, he would buy not 1, not 2, but 500 slaves, whom he used to form the world's first firefighting force. So here's the story. Once a fire broke out, usually at some careless pleb's house, he would wait as it burned before the pleb agreed to sell it for cheap. Then the slaves put off the fire, rebuilt it, and now he had another place to rent as landlord. By the end of this, Crassus would amass a wealth of over 7,000 talents. That's around $10 billion in today's money.
This is actually true. It's a very diabolical way of earning money, but hey, you gotta give him credit for his inventiveness. But yes, there wasn't really a fire brigade system in Rome at the time. It would only be established on the Emperor Augustus. So he ran a private fire brigade, which would come up to these houses when the fire had broken out, and Crassus would kindly offer to buy the burning building in exchange for, putting the fire out. And like they said, this way he was able to accrue some ridiculous amount of money, and he was by far the wealthiest man in Rome at the time. And 7,000 talents can't really be converted into modern day currency. He says 10 billion. It's probably in that range. I wouldn't be surprised if it were. But the point is that he was unfathomably rich.
But despite such success,
which allowed him to actually buy political influence. And that's sort of his function in the triumvirate. By political influence.
Crassus yearned for military glory, bringing us back to Spartacus. Once given command of the war, Crassus fielded several legions out of his own pocket, most of them plebs, taking it upon himself to discipline them by reviving the old practice of decimation, where one randomly picked pleb was beaten to death by the other 9. Meanwhile, the slaves had
Crassus ordered a decimation of the armies that had taken the field against Spartacus in an attempt to restore discipline and order. Now, decimation was, like they said, an old practice whereby the soldiers drew lot and every 10 men was executed. How efficient this system was can only be speculated at, but this was the way of doing things in ancient times, I guess.
Reached the Alps, but instead of getting their supposedly desired freedom, they showed their true colors, choosing to go back and continue to ransack Italy, like the barbarians they were.
there was disunity in Spartacus' army for sure. It was a hodgepodge of various peoples. It was not only slaves, but also Germans and Gauls. And eventually, there was much disunity within Spartacus' camps, which allowed Crassus to divide and conquer. A famous strategy that has been very successful in many wars.
After a long march south, Crassus then met with a Gallic splinter group, destroying their forces and continually pushing Spartacus further south. Desperate, Spartacus struck a deal with Sicilian pirates to ferry his forces to Sicily, where he could continue to ransack the place.
Now, the reason Spartacus wanted to go to Sicily was because this is the third Servile War, as it's called. The first and second Servile Wars had taken place on Sicily, so he hoped by going there he could reignite the rebellions there and gain even more men for his armies. And he paid these pirates to ferry him over, and they just took their money and ran, basically. So he was stuck there.
But they just took the payment and fucked off. And to make things worse for him, Pompey had just returned from Hispania, having ambushed and killed Perpenna, and now helping to encircle Spartacus. Crassus would then crush the slave armies in battle, while Pompey mopped up those who fled. And just to make his point clear, Crassus had all 6,000 survivors crucified along the Appian Way, being left to suffer a fraction of the pain they inflicted upon the civilized world.
Yes, crucifixion was a rather common form of punishment that the Romans employed, most famously against Jesus, of course, but this has been going on for a long time now.
From this point on, every time a slave passed by the area, the living image of Crassus would haunt them and remind them of their miserable, barbarian, servile existence. So that's two triumvirs, with one more to go. His origins stretch back to the legendary hero Aeneas himself, whom fathered Iollas, the progenitor of the gens Julia, one of the Alban patrician families Hostilius would bring into Rome. Forgotten to most was that the gens Julia had made a pact. Instead of being like the other
Caesar's family was descended from Jules, who was the son of Aeneas, and Aeneas in turn is the son of Venus, which in turn made the Julii clan divine. Now, this claim was actually well established in the public consciousness, but despite this pedigree, they were not really that politically influenced in Rome at the time, during the Middle Republic, and it was only during the Late Republic with Caesar's father, and Caesar himself, more importantly, that the Julii clan's fortunes would really turn around.
Clans and occasionally generating outstanding individuals from time to time, the Julians sought to reserve their uniquely divine power until it was most needed. Centuries passed, with the gens Julii embracing a stoic life away from glory, forgotten to most. And now, with the Republic nearing collapse and Rome being surrounded by enemies, it finally happened. The birth of a kind of prodigy that happens only once every era. A man of unparalleled power, intellect, and ambition. The greatest Roman to have ever lived. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar. And that's how you pronounce it. But I'll call him Gaius Julius Caesar anyway.
That's actually true. The C in Latin is a hard C, so that it sounds more like Kaiser. That's actually where we get the German word for Kaiser, emperor. Just a fun fact.
Anyway, saves me the trouble. Born to a humble patrician family, Kaiser would spend his early life instigating both awe and fear in those who met him. At his coming of age, after his father's death and during Sulla's civil war, Kaiser quickly realized the cold truth everyone denied. The Republic had been founded in good spirit for virtuous patricians alone, an impossibility with the influx of plebs into the Senate and the unending barbarian threats that so forced Rome to bend its rules. Caesar pondered heavily on the plebeian question, and while genocide was a quick solution, his pure patrician blood revolted him towards such violent ends. And so, there remained only one solution: to bring the plebs under the leash, and to achieve that, he had to join the Popularis faction, to his immense disgust, and all under Cinna's state.
Despite being a patrician, Caesar would eventually become one of the leaders of the Popularis faction, and later on the only leader of the Popularis faction. And this is an interesting way of going about getting political popularity. Caesar decided to go through the people. Someone like Pompey initially decided, he had much popularity among the people, but the people was not his power base, and he eventually would side firmly with the Senate, or the Optimates, as they would later be called, the aristocratic faction. So this is an interesting choice Caesar made, and there has been much debate over the millennia over whether Caesar actually agreed with the goals of the populares, or if he just exploited the faction to gain power.
Takeover, no less, whom would make Caesar the high priest of Jupiter and marry him to his daughter. Both events that Sulla would unmake once he took over. In truth, Sulla could see the latent power inside Caesar, and fearing the rise of an even stronger Marius, he had him banished from Rome. Despite this, Caesar persisted in his quest, joining the military in his late father's
It's actually quite possible that Caesar was put on Sulla's prescription lists. There has been some debate among scholars if this actually happened, but it's clear, I think, that Sulla saw some dangerous elements in Caesar, and this kind of forced him out of Rome.
province of Asia, where he would help crush some Sicilian pirates in Lesbos along with Lucullus, well enough to gain a civic crown for it. An impressive feat, which Sulla, holder of the grass crown himself, and after much bitching.
This civic crown was a military decoration of the Roman Republic and also the Roman Empire. It was given to Romans who had saved the lives of a fellow citizen, and it was regarded as the second highest decoration to which a Roman citizen could aspire to get. However, someone like Sulla had the grass crown. That was the rarest of military honors, and was only given to a commander who had saved an entire legion or army from destruction. And some of the recipients on this list, it's quite a fine list to be on. Of course, we have Sulla, but then we also have Sertorius, if you remember him. Scipio Aemilianus, who finished the Third Punic War. Flavius Maximus, who successfully fended off Hannibal. And Decius Mus, who in early Roman history defeated the Samnites several times over. So yeah, this was quite a good thing for Caesar's future career.
From Caesar's mother allowed Caesar to return Rome. There he would become a famous orator, swooning the ladies with his divine beauty and inspiring the men with his alpha male vigor. Such was his success that he set sail to teach the Greeks in Rhodes how to be good orators, which was when his ship was attacked by Sicilian pirates. Yes, them again. Initially, they wanted 20 talents for his ransom, but after seeing a fraction of Caesar's power level, they immediately raised it to 5,000, but he told them to keep it at 50.
Well, yeah. According to this story, Caesar was to be sold for 20 talents, and Caesar was actually outraged at this, that they thought so lowly of him, and he demanded that they raise the ransom to 50 talents. And this was done, and I think we're going to get into what he did next.
Being modest and all, casually reminding them that he would have them all crucified. They were laughing at him when he said that.
Yes, he promised that he would come back and crucify them, which apparently he did.
But they sure weren't, as he was nailing them to the cross. The next time we cover a divine individual and a cross will be a while from now. Until then, let's return to our unfinished business in the east. For Mithridates was still alive, annoyingly enough. Lucullus had done his best to pursue him deep into Armenian lands, having defeated his allied king Tigranes in battle along the way. But Mithridates decided to abandon his ally, retaking his Pontic kingdom through Lucullus's back. It was around this time that Pompey was finally sent to rain order down the pirate haven of Sicilia, on his way meeting with Lucullus, whom he had the Senate demote and take his command position. Mithridates
Yes, Pompey had actually passed laws giving him extraordinary powers throughout Asia Minor in order to defeat Mithridates. And he used these powers to finally end the Mithridatic Wars. He also took the opportunity to demote Lucullus, and he was obviously not very happy about this, calling Pompey a vulture, seeing him as an opportunist. Which, to be fair, that's not a wrong assessment of Pompey. But yes, Pompey was quite successful in Asia and in the East, and he would eventually reorganize the Roman East. But I think I'll talk about that later on. Let's see what he mentions.
Barely had time to relax before Pompey stormed his forces, pushing him way back north, where he would kill his own traitorous son. Instead of pursuing him, Pompey saw the decadent, unstable state that the East was in, running a series of campaigns to civilize the region, and installing several puppet states. Among the chaotic eastern kingdoms was that of the Hasmonean Jewish kingdom.
Yes, so the Roman East, or what would become the Roman East, was in a state of disarray, especially because the Seleucid Empire had just collapsed. So Pompey came in, he reorganized the East, he created several client kingdoms, and future allies to Pompey in the process, which he would use against Caesar later on, but that's another story. And this effectively put Asia Minor, Syria, and Palestine under Roman control, and this firmly established Rome as the undisputed imperial power of the Mediterranean world.
And yeah, we finally got to the Jews. They'll be a huge nuisance for Rome as we go on, up until the future Emperor Hadrian comes along, whom hated Jews so much it's hard to believe. But then the Christians were already around, so yeah. In this case, the Jewish king Hyrcanus had been Jewed out of his Jewish throne by his Jewish brother Aristobulus II.
The Roman relationship with Judea and the Jewish people is, how should I say it, complicated. At times they were a loyal client state of Rome, but most of the time they were in a state of revolt, and we know what this leads to with Jesus and all that. So yeah, it's a complicated story, but basically the Jews like to rise up against Rome several times, and like they mentioned, Emperor Hadrian would experience this, and that is like almost 200 years from now. So yeah, it's an ongoing mess, you could say.
They both came to Pompey to mediate their dispute. He told them to chill for a while he visited Petra, but Aristobulus was impatient, returning to Judea to claim his kingdom. This infuriated Pompey, marching his troops down to Jerusalem, where Aristobulus eventually fled to. The Jewish civilians loyal to Hyrcanus was smart enough to let Pompey's troops in, but the priests refused to yield, barricading themselves on the Temple Mount. It was well fortified, but then came the day of the Sabbath, during which, as it happens, Jews are forbidden to meddle with the enemy unless being directly attacked, a fact Pompey exploited to deploy his battering ram. And the Jews, just let him do it. Sure enough, he broke through it the next day and slaughtered some 12,000 Jews, making Judea and its neighbors all client states of Rome. Let's just paint it all red. Much better. You've got to respect the Jews though. No matter how many times they get slaughtered, they never give up on their Jewish ways. A lesson the future Emperor Hadrian would vehemently refuse to learn. God, he really hated Jews. And of course, I couldn't end without telling you that Mithridates had another one of his sons betray him. Tired of it all, he tried to poison himself. But, being so possessed by evil...
Yeah, it's quite ironic considering Mithridates has spent his entire life trying to create immunities against poisons of various types. So, this didn't actually kill him.
Evil, being Greek and all, it had no effect on him. So he just had his bodyguard stab him to death. A violent end for a violent Greek. But I'm afraid the fun has just begun. For the next time, we will focus solely on the legendary life of Caesar, his consulship, the Gallic Wars, his righteous civil wars, and traitorous assassination. I hope to see you then, plebs. Ciao ciao.
Alright, that was part 7 of the Unbiased History of Rome, the First Triumvirate. We didn't actually get into what the First Triumvirate was, but I suspect we will in the next episode, which is entirely dedicated to Julius Caesar apparently, so that will be a treat. But until then, if you have anything you'd like to add, please leave a comment, and if you like the video, leave a like, and subscribe for more. I'll see you guys later.